Well, hello and welcome to the June astrology forecast. Today I'll share some tips for navigating the major aspects this month, including declination aspects. I'll also share some dates for timing important actions. We'll check out the accompanying blog post at astrologyuniversity.com for a full list of the major aspects and dates this month. If you're brand new to declination and you just want to know what it is, check out my video, What is Declination? Alright, with that, let's get started. This month we transition into the energy of Jupiter in Gemini after several months in Taurus, so that's a pretty big deal. But the standout pattern is an increase in out-of-bounds energy with the summer solstice, and that peaks from June 20th to 24th when the Moon, Mercury, and Venus will all be out of bounds at the same time. I'll talk about that shortly, but let's get into Gemini land first. June kicks off with Jupiter in early Gemini, and on June 3rd, once Mercury joins Jupiter, Venus, and the Sun in Gemini, things really start buzzing. Mercury gives us our first activation of Jupiter in Gemini as it makes the conjunction with Jupiter on June 4th. It'll be parallel at the same time, and if you've been following me for a while, you'll know that this is the strongest kind of aspect in astrology, when planets are both conjunct and parallel in declination at the same time. So make room that day for communication and learning or teaching, and share ideas. Crank out a bunch of email, talk to other people, seek out information, but don't forget to listen too. This energy can open you up to needed information that you might be missing, or ideas or facts that are going to help expand your perceptions. But here's a pro tip. You could really frazzle yourself if you don't build in some pauses in this process. Now, I used to practice a very mercurial form of body work called Traeger work. And Traeger work integrates moments in each session where the practitioner takes their hands off the client so that the client has a little time to integrate that work. And we can keep that in mind on June 4th and use that image to take integration breaks throughout the day. These should be short and sweet. Just a concentrated minute or two of silence here and there can make all the difference in going from frantic to present. Use these as reminders to tap into a full awareness of each moment. Consider setting your phone to chime once an hour as a reminder. And even if you're chatting with somebody, you could just say, "Oh, excuse me, but I'm trying out this new mindfulness practice. In fact, do you want to join me? It's really easy. We're just going to take 1 minute together and use that time to sharpen our awareness of the present moment and come back to center." So we'll just be quiet for a minute and then we'll get right back to our conversation. As Mercury joins Jupiter, we'll also pick up some valuable information about what this transit might stir up in us. Observe your thoughts on that day and all month, in fact. Journaling is highly recommended this month and during the entire time that Jupiter will be in Gemini. Now, I love a good old-fashioned print journal, but there are also some really cool apps for your phone that make it easy to highlight moments from your day, and they even make suggestions to get you started. Your scope should be really broad and diverse to align with this energy. Well, that's some of the fun energy as the month starts, but there's a bit of friction too as Mars begins to square Pluto. Now, Mars is in Aries as it applies to Pluto, and combined with the increase in Gemini energy, we're all at risk of problems associated with moving too quickly. I bet it's going to be really hard for some of us not to fall into that trap. That said, I like to honor the energy that is, so I don't recommend bucking against the flow by trying to force yourself to be still or to slow down. We're meant to get things moving during this time to disperse stagnant energy. The key to balance could be developing sharper awareness. Be aware of your surroundings. Do mindfulness practices that help you keep some of your awareness on your body. Sharpen your instincts. Let's say you're walking in a busy city and your map is telling you to turn right up ahead, but you get the feeling that wouldn't be a good idea, and it doesn't totally make sense. But maybe trust your instinct more than the map in this moment. This might be a great image to hold as a metaphor during the first few days of the month. This Mars-Pluto square peaks as Mars enters Taurus June 8th and starts to wane around June 13th. Now, years ago, a client I had with a Mars-Pluto aspect in her natal chart told me about a book that had really helped her, and it's called The Gift of Fear by Gavin de Becker. It's a bit of a dark book about how to navigate situations we might find ourselves in that have the potential to turn violent. Now, I have mixed feelings about recommending this book because it really can increase fear if we're not being mentally skillful as we read it, because it describes several different scary scenarios. But I love the book because it's also full of practical tips that are really worth thinking about in advance should you ever find yourself in one of those situations. And one message that runs throughout the book has to do with trusting your instinct. He talks about people who made it through dangerous experiences, and many of them recount how there was a moment when all of their instincts were giving them a clear message, and if they hadn't listened, there may have been a different outcome. And speaking of instinct, I'll leave it to you to tap into your own guidance to see if this might be a helpful book for you during this time. Now moving on, the big news this month is Mercury, Venus, and the Moon all being out of bounds at the same time. The Moon is going out of bounds twice every month right now, and it'll be out of bounds in Gemini and Cancer from June 6th to 10th. Then Venus will be out of bounds June 11th through the 29th, and Mercury will be out of bounds from June 12th to 28th. And by the way, that's a really long amount of time for Mercury to be out of bounds. Usually it's just out of bounds for a few days. When the Moon goes out of bounds for the second time in the month, June 20th to 24th, all three planets will be out of bounds at the same time. Make sure to mark these days on your calendar. If you're sensitive to tracking transiting planetary energies, well, these are really great days for thinking about and figuring out this out of bounds vibe if it's new to you. And if you have planets in the early cardinal signs, you're getting a direct activation from Mercury and Venus that you might experience in a very personal way. Well, let's break down what that means, starting with Mercury out of bounds, which can take us into our heads more than usual, especially from June 11th to 16th, while it's also in Gemini. People born with natal Mercury out of bounds sometimes have a stronger head-heart split than other folks in favor of the head. And this gives them a powerful resource for thinking and problem solving. They can be really great at puzzles or mind games that ask them to see things in a different way than normal. But we all know the pitfalls of being too much in our heads and not in our hearts. One antidote is to just keep checking in with your heart so that it can become an equal participant in that conversation as well. The thing is, we want to honor Mercury out of bounds by giving it free rein to do its thing without getting distracted by the heart. So my suggestion is to compartmentalize. Give Mercury time to do its thing without interruption, and when you feel complete in that process, then ask your heart to join the conversation and get its response. Now hold that thought while I weave in Venus, and we'll come back in just a minute. Being out of bounds can amplify what a planet signifies. So when Venus is out of bounds, that can increase our sense of attraction or aversion. We can experience an increase of pleasure as we feel taken with this part of our desire nature, which works in concert with Mars. But the Venus part of our desire nature has us immersed in our attractions. What or who are we attracted to, and how do we attract? If this transit's activating your first house, for example, or the ruler of your ascendant, you might check out your wardrobe and see if you're in need of a refresh or an update. Tread carefully though. You might feel suddenly empowered to get that wild haircut you didn't think you could pull off before, and then you have second thoughts about it as Venus comes back into an average declination range. I like to think about encouraging the creativity from out of bounds that comes up while also being aware of your baseline self. Now you can use this story as a metaphor and apply it to whatever house is activated in your chart. So this could be a relationship story if it's in your 7th, or something to do with your friend group if it's in your 11th, for example. Now sometimes an out of bounds Venus will help us make a needed shift, and other times it takes us in a wacky direction that feels out of sorts later. You'll just have to work that one out for yourself. But this is Venus, so checking in with a friend before you do something really out of character is probably good advice. Now Venus and Mercury will be working together hand in hand this month, first in Gemini and then in Cancer, so there are also great opportunities for conversations that can help smooth things over, or help us talk our way into better rapport, or choose our words artfully to create connection. But there's a big caveat this same time period, let's say from June 14th to 17th, when Venus and Mercury, along with the Sun, will be squaring Neptune at the same time. Now there's a wild mix of cerebral, logical energy clashing with the imaginative, diffuse, confusing, or maybe even somewhat shady energy all at once. Just when you think you have it all figured out, you could very well be off on a wild goose chase. Well, let me share an example from my own experience to give you an image of what I mean. I once had some medical labs done, and they showed a surprising development regarding certain markers that had been looked at before in my labs, and a new course of treatment was suggested that had me feeling out of sorts. The labs were the labs though, that was the logical piece. But as I sat with it, something just didn't feel right. I started to get intuition that conflicted with these so-called facts. And here's where the kicker came in. A few months later, it was discovered that my labs had been switched with someone else's, and my new labs showed consistency with my previous labs, so it turned out I didn't need that treatment after all. Well, this blip was essentially corrupt data. And that brings me to my point. During this Neptune square, the Sun, out of bounds Mercury, and Venus, you're being asked to listen to your intuition at the same time as connecting all of those dots rationally. But can you get out of your head long enough to even hear your true intuition? You may be totally sure that the choice you're making is the logical one based on the facts. But what if you're dealing with a faulty set of data? If you're making important choices during this time based on information or logic, you might want to also keep exploring all possibilities and wait it out for a couple of weeks if that's an option for you, and then go back over that data to make sure everything's in order. With that, let's talk about the good days for action this month before we wrap up. With Venus and Jupiter no longer in Taurus, we're missing that sweet spot for connection when the moon's in Cancer or Taurus that we've been spoiled by lately. While the Sun cazimi conjunct and parallel to Venus on June 5th might look tempting, and I'm sure a lot of folks will be talking about it online, keep in mind they're both applying to square Saturn, and that same day Mars is applying to square Pluto. The good news here is that Venus and Gemini could help you sweet talk your way around any tension that's building up around those aspects. This chart says the pivot is your friend. Change your point of view, or maybe change someone else's. But it's probably not the best day for a new start. During the waxing moon, our best day might be June 16th. The moon's in Libra then, applying to trine the Sun, and its last aspect is a trine to Mercury. So there's some sweet stuff there. The problem is that we also have that tricky aspect with Neptune I was just talking about, and that can impair our clarity. So if you need to take an important action that day, you might also want to feel confident that you've integrated your logic with your intuitive guidance in order to avoid getting off track. A better day might be June 26th after the moon goes into Pisces and trines the Sun and Venus. Check out the chart with Venus in Cancer on the ascendant. The moon is waning on that day though, so this might not be the best chart for a brand new venture, but it could be pretty great for something you've already been working on that's more in a state of integration or maturity. Well, that's it for now, and thanks for listening, friends. Check out the calendar at astrologyuniversity.com/events for our upcoming events, like our very first mini conference in September of 2024, Under the Shadow of the Moon, with Demetra George, Kelly Surtees, Mark Jones, and Lynn Bell. Join us in Colorado to hear all those amazing astrologers talking about different dimensions of the moon. Or catch one of our weekend webinars, like Exploring Planets in Detriment with Kelly Surtees. All of our webinars are available to stream with lifetime access right after the live presentation. Well, that takes me to the end of this month's forecast. I hope you're able to make good use of the planetary energies this month, and until next time, take good care.